it's Karl Thomson here from StorageCraft. Thank you for attending this webinar today. It's going to be a 60-minute deep dive on ShadowProtect with a large focus for virtual environments. So how I'm going to run this webinar today is that we're going to go through a little bit of a presentation. It's going to enable me to really articulate to you how ShadowProtect works, and a lot of this focus on obviously disaster recovery and rapidly recovering machines very quickly into VMware and Hyper-V environments. So I'm going to start with a couple of slides. Obviously I much prefer doing live demonstrations and that kind of thing, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I think it'll cover some really good information for you to really understand at a very deep level around how our technology works and why we can be so successful in this virtual space. So I call it the ShadowProtect solution, right? Is that ShadowProtect is what we sell, obviously the latest version, ShadowProtect SPX. ShadowProtect includes a lot of technology, VirtualBoot's included, our image manager software is included, ShadowControl, Centralized management is included. So this family of products and software is what we sell as ShadowProtect. So firstly, what I'd like to start with, and this really helps you guys understand that ShadowProtect is not just a backup software. We're not just a product that backs up stuff. Our focus is on recovery, disaster recovery. Now the reason I need to start with this is because it's really important to understand how to get the best out of the software, and how you architect or deploy it is really going to be important. Inherently, ShadowProtect is so easy to use that we've been extremely successful because of the simplicity in the software. The problem, I guess, is that it allows you to do things in a very legacy mindset, as well as obviously taking advantage of our world-class real-time technology. And what I mean by that is obviously it's disk to disk, so you could back up to anything. You could back up to NAS storage, you could back up to a USB drive, but some of these things can limit the recovery time. And so obviously we need to focus on or understand what the actual outcome is we want to achieve to get the best out of ShadowProtect. So I think this is a really big thing, is understanding what's the problem we're actually trying to address with a backup solution, and it's obviously disaster recovery and business continuity. So getting the planning and understanding the architecture is really important, and I like to start with that. The other thing is obviously we have included in ShadowProtect scheduling options to simulate what people are most comfortable historically doing, i.e. full backups daily, weekly or monthly. And that is, that's not really our best practice recommendation in getting the most out of our technology. So again, ShadowProtect is extremely easy to use and works very well, but we're going to look at best practice and how to really leverage some of this really cool technology that's built in. So the first thing, just to understand at a very high level, is what actually causes downtime. So you've got, application operational errors. A lot of this will be human error, it'll be software changes, but also ransomware would fit over this 80%. This is a huge chunk of where people need disaster recovery. It's not the stuff you see on the evening news like fire, floods, and earthquakes. In fact, a natural disaster, represented in orange there, in fact, a natural disaster would only just be 3%. So hardware, security issues, power, that kind of thing would fit in there at around 17%. But really, I guess what I'm saying here is that 97% of the time, you don't need a major disaster to simply want rapid system recovery. Everyday occurrences can bring a system down, and we want to restore them right back to where they come from. If one VM fails, I don't want to bring that up in the cloud or at a DR site. Then I've got to get it back, and I've got to route to a different network. So we actually want to have local recovery as the primary objective. That's why we're backing up, is so that we can recover really quickly. Now, the challenges that we're seeing out there is that 85% of critical systems are not backed up adequately. Now, what that means is that there are products out there that will do backup, and they'll do backup quite well, but the recovery, if your backup's file-based and it's on tape, or there's a lengthy process to initiate a restore, that's not acceptable. It's too long to recover. If your backups are doing full backups that every day that then require expensive dedupe and then WAN optimization to get off site, again, it's a challenge, and a lot of the time your recovery can be limited. And a big part of ShadowProtect is having consistent backups. VSS aware, which means not only are we getting good backups, but we can rely on the recovery that the system's in a known state. The other challenge we see is that data growth rates are doubling. Now, everyone hears the statistic, but this is a real problem because obviously you've got to store all of this stuff and then we've got to back it up. And a lot of backup products will struggle to back up large servers because there's a lot of data and they have backup windows where they're trying to get it in overnight because it's doing a full backup, or even just incremental backups take a long time in a lot of products, and therefore they can only back up once a day. They have impact to a system, and so they can't do it. So actually ShadowProtect has what's called real-time tracking, and you're going to learn about this in the webinar. We actually track data in real time. So even for very large systems, ShadowProtect handles this extremely well. And by default, ShadowProtect backs up every hour throughout the day, and quite often people are bringing that down to every 15 minutes. So this is really powerful. We can have 96 incremental backups a day without disrupting users and immediately have a copy of them off-site ready for recovery. Now, another alarming statistic, up to 40% of backup restores fail. So that's a major problem if you're monitoring your customers' backups and then all of a sudden you don't know if it's actually going to recover. That's a real big problem. So our solution has built-in ways to automate verification. We've got built-in periodic and immediate verification. We've got advanced verification to actually boot up images and take screenshots to show you that systems are successfully booting. So there's some really cool stuff here. And obviously ransomware is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So a lot of the methodologies that people have been using in the past are no longer appropriate in today's digital world with this type of ransomware that can bring a system down at any time, and the data loss to roll back to last night is not acceptable. We need to be able to rapidly recover back an hour ago. So obviously the focus has to be recovery. That is the number one objective of putting in a backup or disaster recovery solution. Obviously we need to start with a reliable backup. We need a way to easily manage all of our customers from a single dashboard. We need to include offsite replication to isolate these backups from the on-prem for any type of disaster, whether it's a ransomware type issue or it's a site failure. And then we need one solution that's going to work across physical and virtual workloads and obviously have cloud-based recovery as well. So our solution, as we've talked about, is ShadowProtect. And ShadowProtect SPX is our latest version of this that has some world-winning patents and functionality that's built in. And that's what we're going to learn about in this webinar today. So one of the key things here is looking, I like to use diagrams. So let's focus initially on on-prem. We've got up the top left there, production servers, physical, virtual, Windows or Linux. ShadowProtect supports over 12 different hypervisors. Installs into the Windows or Linux operating system, into the VM or onto the physical server. We're going to learn about a lot of the technology that's baked into this agent that makes it extremely powerful. But we can back up as frequent as every 15 minutes without any disruption to users. Ideally, we're going to back up to a dedicated backup and disaster recovery service. So this would just be a Windows-based server. This would run our included for free image manager software that performs verification, consolidation, and retention. This is where you can perform file and folder recovery, granular recovery for Exchange, but also VirtualBoot. So with any ShadowProtect backup, where something goes wrong, we can instantly virtualize it into a VM. Now, it doesn't matter where the backup has come from. It doesn't matter how large it is. We boot straight off the backup image. Now, you could actually, as per this diagram, boot onto the backup server as a Hyper-V or an Oracle VirtualBox temporary VM. It automatically does its hardware-independent restore. But the other really cool thing is that you don't have to have a dedicated backup server. VirtualBoot can boot right back into your production Hyper-V workload or right back into your VMware vSphere workload. So it doesn't have to have a dedicated backup server, but obviously in those smaller customer sites, it does provide some redundancy if they only had one hypervisor host. You can have a Windows 10 PC here. It could be an older server. We've got flexible hypervisor options for any type of recovery operation. Now, additional to VirtualBoot, Image Manager now includes at no extra cost HeadStart Restore. This used to be a licensed feature, but this also facilitates a lot of different functions. So I've put in here enterprise disaster recovery. If you have the luxury of excess storage, i.e. a spare SAN, you could, instead of VirtualBoot, have backups that come in, get verified, and then automatically pre-staged into a standby virtual machine ready for rapid recovery. Now, the advantage here compared with VirtualBoot is that when you bring these up in a similar time frame, they're not running off a compressed image, so it's a complete migration. It's running out of an entirely provisioned virtual disk, so you're going to have that performance straight away. So it is a premium solution from that perspective, but obviously the downside or the flip side is that you need that extra storage to have the pre-staged virtual disk sitting there. This is an extremely powerful solution. HeadStart Restore could also be used in conjunction with VirtualBoot. So for example, if you did have a backup server as per this example and you recovered into Hyper-V or VMware, into VirtualBox, which would install on the backup server, HeadStart Restore can pre-stage that temporary virtual boot machine back into my production Hyper-V or VMware workload, or even using our recovery environment, we have what's called the manual HeadStart Restore, which facilitates the same thing back onto a physical device. So VirtualBoot generally as a temporary VM, HeadStart would then pre-stage that. It means that we can rapidly recover right now, and then the restore process, which may take time, allows us to replace the SAN or the server or whatever production had the issue and pre-stage the data back, enabling a very quick cutover. So a lot of different technologies, obviously, initially in how it should be architected on-prem. The second, or the final step, I guess, is to consider offsite replication. So we've got a lot of built-in technologies here. My webinar today is not focused on the offsite stuff, but for completeness here, what we've got is intelligent FTP is included by free. That enables you to replicate to your own remote site. I've shown there your own remote DR site. You might be running Image Manager. You could leverage VirtualBoot or HeadStart Restore there as well. We also have an included S3 replication technology if you want to replicate into S3 for long-term, low-cost archival. And then obviously we've got the StorageCraft Cloud Disaster Recovery as a Service where you could replicate a copy to StorageCraft. Generally it's going to be lower term retention, but that's going to facilitate complete site failover if you wanted that as well. So extremely flexible. If you're replicating to your own DR site or into your, as our MSPs might replicate into their data center for all their customers, there's no extra licensing. The intelligent FTP solution is included for free, as well as any of the offsite disaster recovery and management. Now, one key part of the solution is obviously that if we have a site failure, wherever we are offsite, we have the ability to rapidly recover. So very powerful, recover on-site and off-site is all included with ShadowProtect. So again, forget about just backing up stuff and think about DR. How can we leverage these technologies? And that's what we're going to look at today in a live demonstration. In terms of licensing, we just need to license ShadowProtect is the number one thing, whether you want to go down the socket-based model for a large number of VMs, or we can license MSP per VM, or you can perpetually buy packs of VMs. Image Manager, HeadStart Restore, and Replication are all included. Obviously, there's an extra service available if you'd like to use the StorageCraft Cloud, but otherwise everything is included. Now, one of the other things actually that I've got in here is ShadowControl. So let me just pull up. Here we go, pen, I'm just going to get a highlighter. So ShadowControl, there's two options on how you might deploy ShadowControl. One, generally our MSPs like to run their own ShadowControl in their office or in their data center, and it's fully multi-tenancy. It gives them visibility across all of their customers. This highly complements existing RMM tools you might already use, has a lot of automation and SLA-based status rule monitoring, which is extremely powerful. The other scenario could be that the customer themselves wants to run ShadowControl on-prem. So that would generally be for a larger customer with their own IT team. You can run your own ShadowControl and manage that as well. It's entirely free. It's included at no cost to run as basically a virtual machine or run it in the cloud. So extremely easy, but ShadowControl is multi-tenancy, so you can manage or monitor multiple different sites. You can have different users with different levels of access or visibility. Our MSPs that run it can actually provide logins to their customers to log into the dashboard and just see information about their site or receive very specific reporting. So really cool. ShadowControl is a major complementary part of the ShadowProtect solution. Now, let me just grab my mouse back. So just going through some of the highlighted functions that I've kind of covered off here. The first one is consistent sector-based backups. So what this means, let's break it into two parts. Consistent. ShadowProtect agent includes the StorageCraft volume snapshot software provider. This is a long word. What it does is this is basically a VSS provider. It means our agent is responsible for talking directly to SharePoint, Exchange, SQL, Active Directory to make sure that they are in a consistent state before a backup happens. This makes our software guest aware. We're not going to point it to, blame it on VMware or Hyper-V tools or hypervisor tools to perform that for us. We've got control of that ourselves. There doesn't need to be finger pointing. If this provider was to malfunction, it would automatically leverage Microsoft's built-in VSS provider as an alternate option to, again, try and get a consistent state of the system before a backup proceeds. So again, having this in-guest agent provides a very high level consistency of the backup. The other thing is sector-based. Now what does that mean? So generally you've got three types of backup solutions. You've got a backup product that will do file-based, that backs up entire copies of any file that is changed. You've then got CBT or block-based, which backs up at a block level. And then you've got sector level. ShadowProtect is one of very few, if not the only backup product that backs up at a sector level. It is truly the lowest measurement on disk in terms of any changeable data. So at the sector level, you can see here 8 sectors generate to a 4K block. Our backup incremental sizes are extremely thin, they're highly compressed. Again, because we're using incrementals forever, there's no duplicated data being backed up. We're not backing up full images ever again. We're only getting the sector-based changes. So extremely powerful, enabling easy replication of site, enabling really good retention for long-term requirements as well. Next thing, protection every 15 minutes with zero impact. So by performing these sector-level backups, it reduces I/O because we don't have to interrogate the file system, and we only back up the changed sectors. So very fast, lower impact in-memory incrementals. So this is extremely important. In fact, ShadowProtect defaults to hourly throughout the day. Most other products you'll see default to once a day because they have some form of disruption. Now, talking of that zero impact, it's really important to understand what I actually mean by this. And what I'm referring to zero impact is that it does not disrupt the users at all, okay? So by being in-guest snapshots, we don't do any type of hypervisor stun. There's no pause or hang to the VM. Therefore, we can do this throughout the day without causing any problems. And I believe that is a really important part of having a reliable, frequent backup solution. Recover server in minutes. So we've got a lot of technologies that this webinar is focused on today. StorageCraft VirtualBoot lets us instantly boot backup images directly into a virtual machine, regardless of where it came from. Additionally, HeadStart Restore allows us to pre-stage backups in advance, enabling rapid recovery as well. So a lot of great technologies for recovery on-site or off-site. Obviously physical and virtual support across Windows, Linux, and 12 different virtual hypervisor environments. Also, a hardware-independent restore technology allows any P2P, V2V, P2V type migration. It's extremely flexible. You can restore anywhere you need to be. Image management, obviously our image manager software is what performs the verification, periodic re-verification, consolidation, retention, replication. It's a very powerful piece of our solution. What this fundamentally means is that ShadowProtect never has to do another full backup ever again. All of that processing is offloaded to the backup machine. Image Manager will manage that for us. And finally, ShadowControl, our centralized monitoring, management, and deployment dashboard, purpose-built for the MSP, but obviously very powerful in the mid-market and enterprise customer base as well. So let's just dig in very quickly on how ShadowProtect works. Now I'm going to get very deep here in terms of how it works, and I think it will help you guys understand how to get the best out of ShadowProtect. So the key things here is firstly, when you install the ShadowProtect software, there's three or four components really. I'm going to break it down to basically three main ones. There's the SPX service, the ShadowProtect service. So this is what talks to the registry, this is what tells the backup to run, this is how your console will manage the backup jobs. So the service is an important piece. The next piece is the Shadow Copy Provider Service, or otherwise known as vSnap VSS. So this is another service that runs, this is the Shadow Copy Provider that talks to all of your VSS writers for a consistent backup. And tied in very closely to this is the StorageCraft Volume Snapshot driver, or otherwise known as STC VSM. And this is actually what requires the reboot with our software. One of the things we're working towards is with Microsoft leveraging the mini filter driver to actually try and reduce reboots, particularly when we do software updates. So there's some cool stuff coming there as well. Now, STC VSM talks to the low-level kernel. So what we have in the kernel is called VDIF. It's a 16K kernel bitmap file, and it records changed sectors in real time. So I've kind of made this little diagram here. Basically, you've got the operating system that's managing your NTFS file system. As that writes to disk, obviously the data transitions through the kernel with this red arrow that I've got going from the file system and gets written to disk. So the filter drivers sit here, and this again is what we're going to leverage in the future with Microsoft's mini filter driver. But this is where antivirus type applications will sit and monitor in real time to make sure that stuff doesn't hit the disk that shouldn't be there. So this is also where VDIF silently records as stuff gets written to disk. So we're at such a low level that we're not interrogating the file system in any way that's going to cause any disruption. Now, why this is important to explain to you is that VDIF obviously has to record that information somewhere so that it knows when the backup happens what's changed. So how this kind of works secretly, not really talked about a lot, but it will publish, it will record this information into the unused space on your disk. Now, because it's not in the file system, you don't see this space being used. But the reason why this is important, and you would have seen historically in best practice will say you should allow for 20% free space on a disk. Now, obviously, when you're talking hundreds or terabytes of data, we don't actually expect you to have 20% available, but bear in mind, it's recording everything that changes until the next backup happens. So if you've got a volume that's got next to no free space and you've decided to only back up once a day, that's where VDIF could run into a problem with running out of space. Obviously, it will self-heal itself and continue those backups, but you want to try and avoid that. So again, backing up frequently allows VDIF to offload those backups into backup images, and it's not having to consume, disk space storing those changes. So you can even see on some high rate of change systems, backing up every 15 minutes is extremely effective and doesn't have that general disruption that you would see with other products. Now, the two key parts to be aware of with VDIF is obviously when you shut down, how does VDIF keep tracking what's happened? So we unload into a hidden file called vsm000.idx. This is a hidden file on the system volume. This will just simply contain the sectors that have changed since the last backup through a shutdown until VDIF kicks in and starts tracking again. So at that low-level kernel, VDIF actually turns off after the operating system is shut down, and the same thing before it starts up. So it's got this tracking in real time. Now, we need to look after VDIF. If your system was to crash, i.e. a power cut or some sort of problem, obviously VDIF will lose what it's looking up for in terms of its real-time tracking, and the IDX, the VSM000 file, doesn't get created. So what happens when a system crashes is VDIF gets flagged in the kernel and tells ShadowProtect, I don't know where we're at, you're going to have to perform a diffgen. So a diffgen, or otherwise known as a self-healing incremental, allows ShadowProtect to scan the system again, compare it to the last known good incremental. We're not a differential back to the base. It can take a bit of time to do a self-healing incremental because it's got to rescan the system, it's got to mount the last backup and look at the file allocation, and then obviously produce an incremental with the changes. The really great thing is the incremental is going to be generally very small. It's only going to contain the data between when the last backup was and right now, but it may take some time to do that. So really powerful built-in self-healing incremental. So what do all this mean? VSnap, VSM, VSS, VDIF. What is the actual outcome? Well, what it is, if we talked about fast, frequent, and consistent backups, sectors are the smallest and most efficient, they're application aware, and it's really just set and forget. What you'll see when we jump into ShadowProtect is that there's not a lot of options because it's backing up everything. You don't need to get in to all these different agents for different services or exclude stuff. It is backing up entire volumes extremely quickly and very simply. This results in flexible recovery points on-site and off-site. You have a single backup chain for all requirements, which ultimately results in rapid and flexible recovery. So the other piece of this puzzle is VirtualBoot, and this is one that I just don't think has been used enough. It is included for free with our software. It is one of the best parts of ShadowProtect. And really, if you're not deploying it in a suitable way, think of a backup server or direct attached or SAN storage to actually give us a decent recovery performance, you're not going to have the best experience. For example, if my backups are on a USB drive, or if they're on a NAS, particularly over like a Samba file sharing connection, the recovery is not going to be the smoothest with VirtualBoot. So we need to think about how backups, where the storage is and what that performance is going to be like. But some of the key things here is obviously we support vSphere, Hyper-V and VirtualBox. It's great for testing and verifying backups. It's great for system recovery. It's also great for system migration. But it is included at no cost with ShadowProtect. You can have ShadowProtect sitting on, your workstation or on a backup server. It doesn't even need to be licensed to perform a VirtualBoot. So with VirtualBox, obviously that's great if you've got a Windows 7 or Windows 8 PC. It's also good if you've got, maybe a 2008 type old server that you want to leverage as the backup recovery server. Once you jump up to Windows 2012 R2 or newer, or even Windows 10, you could leverage Hyper-V. So this came out as a feature in SPX in 2015. And again, it allows you to leverage existing Hyper-V environments, where you don't necessarily want to have a dedicated backup and disaster recovery server. So fantastic way to instantly virtualize backups into Hyper-V. And then vSphere. So vSphere, again, performs instant recovery, permanent and seamless migration to ESXi. So I guess just to focus on that for a second, with Hyper-V and also with Oracle VirtualBox, these are temporary virtual machines that need to be pre-staged back into a full production server or virtual disk. Now with vSphere, this is definitely our most feature-rich option because it can actually transparently backfill and completely migrate a VM at the same time. Now the cool thing here, much like Hyper-V and VirtualBox, is that access to the data is a single hop away from the hypervisor. It doesn't have to restore through a VM and perform a secondary conversion process. There's no appliance, enabling a very rapid recovery. So with vSphere, you currently require ESXi 6.0 update 2 or newer. It needs to be in a cluster, so you need to look at whether you need vSphere standard or not to include clustering. But yeah, leveraging vCenter again, 6.0 update 2 or newer up to vSphere 6.5 will facilitate a virtual boot off any ShadowProtect image. And as part of that process, as with Hyper-V and VirtualBox, we'll inject the appropriate drivers to ensure a rapid recovery regardless of where that backup was created. Now with vSphere, we've got this pattern STC IO filter that talks directly to the ShadowProtect images. Again, we don't have to route it through a virtual machine or an appliance to perform the recovery, which is a very quick way to recover. We won the Gold Award in 2016 up against 145 backup vendors for the best integration into vSphere, and it's also highly certified as a VMware-ready solution. So VirtualBoot, where do you use it? It's obviously testing it. We can automate this testing, but testing to know your DR plan and how long things take and the process is fantastic. You can test a VirtualBoot while the production server is still running. It is not going to perform any disruption to the environment. It's also great for temporary failovers. Obviously physical or any virtual machine has a virus, software goes wrong, it crashes, or there's some sort of hardware failure, we can rapidly recover onto a temporary machine. Software testing in a virtual sandbox. Now this is one I wish I used more when I used to work as an IT reseller. I had this scenario where I think it was once every 3 months at a particular travel agent, this particular third-party software vendor would ask me, hey, can I jump in and we need to perform a quarterly update on the software? And just about every time they did it, it took longer than they thought. There were problems. The customer couldn't get online and they had to spend time fixing it because it was done on a live production server. And, I'll ask them, hey, can you guys test the update before you do it next time? And they say, yes, what we've done this time is we've installed the same version of Windows your customer has. We've got the same version of the software and we've tested it's going to be fine. But it wasn't the same server. It wasn't all the same settings. It wasn't the same database. All of those different things. So a sandpit testing environment, VirtualBoot can instantly virtualize a backup from 15 minutes ago, an exact copy into a different network. They could have tested it in there, figured out their problems. The customer could have logged in and verified that they were okay, again, before they went and did that in production. So sandpit testing is a fantastic use case for VirtualBoot. Obviously, historical data access. If you want to boot up a copy of a version of a server from a particular point in time, that's great for that. And finally, seamless recovery and migration. So obviously, vSphere has the seamless migration, the transparent backfill built into it, which is really cool. HeadStart Restore is the other focus of today. So HeadStart Restore can be used in conjunction with VirtualBoot. It may just be for some of your more critical servers, or it might be to go from VirtualBoot back into production. So it is a fantastic way to pre-stage a recovery before a disaster strikes. It's really, really cool and now included technology. As we talked about, it can be used on-site or off-site. Again, by pre-staging, it can also be used for migration. So what this really means fundamentally is you set this up in advance to migration or disaster. So the longest part of any restore is obviously restoring all that data. So HeadStart Restore can get that out of the way while the server is still functional, and it continues to run permanently. As backups come in, Image Manager verifies them, you configure what's called a lag time, and it will automatically restore them into a standby environment. And this just runs until there's a problem. You tell Image Manager to finalize that disk. You can choose any point in that recovery window, and within minutes you can have it turned around and up and running. So HeadStart Restore is fantastic. It's great for hardware or software failures. When something goes down, we can rapidly roll back. It's also great for migrations, P2V, V2V type scenarios, or migrating from one on-prem to a data center or across to different sites, because obviously as part of HeadStart you could have replication sending a copy to a second place. So fantastic for that. And obviously virtual standby. So, you know, it's the cool thing here, right, is that you're getting pretty close to high availability with the solution. Obviously high availability, you've got SAN-to-SAN replication, real, you know, you can have real-time failover. The problem is if there's ransomware or some other application issue, which is a statistically large portion of downtime, actually you need to roll back to before that problem happened, and that's where ShadowProtect can be backing up every 15 minutes. It can immediately replicate to a remote site, and we can have that backup sitting in a virtual disk ready to go. So, you know, RTO 15 minutes becomes, you know, near high availability. Very powerful solution. So enough slides for today. Let's jump into a lab environment I've got set up, and let's take a look at some of the ShadowProtect software. Now we'll just highlight, if you've got any questions, please do type them in. I don't have any that have come through yet, and I generally don't look at it until the end, but if I cover over anything too quickly, I will come back at the end and I'll show you anything that you'd like to see. I also mentioned that the session is recorded and will be available for all of you to view on our YouTube channel after the webinar has finished. So what we're going to do is just go ahead here and bring up a lab environment I've got here. Now we'll just point out that this server I'm on is a Hyper-V server. What I'm going to do is we're going to look at the backup and recovery with ShadowProtect, and we're also going to look at a VMware environment as a method of recovery as well. So I'm just starting with this initially. Now what I'd like to do, I guess let's just back up right up to some basic stuff first. So ShadowProtect can be push installed, it can be deployed via group policy. Once it's installed, one of the key things obviously is we can jump onto a console, or we can install it without a console and remote manage it, or we can do what's called policy-based configuration. So ShadowProtect can actually be deployed without logging on at all, and the job can be deployed via ShadowControl. But just taking a very sort of high-level look from the actual console, with ShadowProtect, you know, give it a name, choose a destination, put in a comment. We've got compression standard of up to 40%, and with, you know, file servers you might see upwards of 80% with that. Best is going to be closer to 50% compression. Encryption is on by default, AES 256, but it's giving you the most secure backup. Encryption is required if you would like to use the StorageCraft cloud, but also highly recommended. Now in terms of the backups, generally you're just going to back up all the volumes. We don't need the system reserve, so you can choose to deselect that. But we're not getting down to a file and folder level. We're capturing entire volumes. So if there is stuff you don't want in the backup, you want that on a different volume. And this is really fundamentally enabling us to back up extremely quickly. We won't include the page file by default, and best practice is to make that a fixed size so it's not moving around causing VDIV to ignore it. But we include entire volumes at the sector level. So, you know, think about things like Windows Update services, antivirus management databases. Think about SQL backup files. You know, if your DBA is doing a daily BAK backup for its maintenance task, that doesn't need to be on a volume that ShadowProtect's also backing up. That will cause a blowout in your incremental sizes. So think about how your servers are structured to get the very best out of the software. Now with a schedule, obviously the focus is a continuous incremental schedule. You can select all days, every day of the week, all days, that's 24 hours, every 15 minutes. That would be 96 times a day if you want to. You know, to be fair, I have seen customers define a schedule that goes every 15 minutes, and they've added in another schedule every 15 minutes and a third one every 15 minutes, and they've got it down to every 5 minutes. I mean, I think it's a bit of an overkill. I don't really think your system needs to be protected at that level, and certainly your reaction time is going to be beyond that as well. So again, this is not a high availability. It's targeted for consistent backups. Generally, I like to back up. I like to leave a bit of a window in the day. So generally, I'd suggest, 4 or 5 in the morning, start your incrementals off the hour, and then run it through, maybe till 10 at night once people stop working. So, every 15 minutes is totally fine. That's giving you protection throughout the day before people come to work, after they go home, gives your server a bit of rest in the early hours of the morning when it might be doing updates or, SQL tasks or defrags or exchange indexing, that kind of stuff. Probably don't need the backups there, but absolutely it would run fine throughout the day. So very simple. That's really all that's required to set up a ShadowProtect job if you wanted to do a one-off test or configuration. So what we'd like to do is let's jump into a virtual machine here and take a look at the console. Again, you don't need to have ShadowProtect installed, the console on the servers, but the underlying agent is obviously key. So what we're going to do is copy some stuff from my network share onto the desktop. Now this is 8,500 files. This is a file-based backup's worst nightmare. Thousands of files changing. There's no way a lot of products can deal with backing this up frequently throughout the day. But this might be quite standard in a large environment, a big file server, a lot of users. Thousands of things could be changing. So what ShadowProtect's doing in real time is it's tracking these sectors as they change on disk. So if we just take a look while that's running, services.msc, we've got in here the ShadowProtect service. So if we look down here, StorageCraft SPX, so that's what's obviously going to tell the backup to run, and that's how we configure it. We've then got the Shadow Copy Provider, so that's going to talk to Exchange, SQL, SharePoint. We've also got the endpoint agent, and that's for ShadowControl for the centralized monitoring. So that's the underlying functions there. So what we're going to do here, right, is let's say I'll call this STC Deep Dive, and this is on a Sydney server. It's currently 11.39 a.m. in Sydney. So let's follow that file. Now, in ShadowProtect, I'm opening up the console just to show you. Again, you don't have to deploy the console onto machines. This job wasn't even configured on this computer. It's got what's called a policy-based job. So this is showing me the backup job. You can see here it's called a ShadowControl policy. That means I can't edit, delete, or change that job. It is totally locked down and managed by ShadowControl. So I'm just going to pop into ShadowControl very quickly. I'm going to go straight into the endpoint section. The server was backed up 26 minutes ago, so I'm going to continue its incremental job, but I'm going to ask it to run one right now. So we can see the API has invoked the ShadowProtect job. It's doing a very quick check that all the backups are in place. It's now performing the VSS aware snapshot with its own built-in VSS provider. That is going to invoke all of my VSS writers to take a clean, consistent snapshot of the system. It is now writing that 8,500 files into a backup image. So we can see once that finishes that that entire backup job took just 23 seconds. That's quicker than it even took me to copy those backups there in the first place. So extremely fast, consistent backups that can happen frequently throughout the day. Now the cool thing is if I just zoom out on this timeline, this is actually a pattern timeline. So I can see here I wasn't backing up in the evening. I can see the first backups in the day. They spike up. There's a full backup done a couple of days ago when I started this. But this indicates, when bigger backups are happening, you get a higher line. I can mount these backups for file and folder recovery straight from the interface. So very intuitive, very fast way to perform file and folder recovery. But I think that's fairly basic. Let's say, look, we're on a system, we're making a major change, or it gets some sort of Windows update, or we get ransomware, and the system blue screens. Again, this is where your recovery, your high availability is no good. We need to go back to backup. So this server's no good to me. It's just gone and shut down. I need to look at how I can get that back up and running as quick as possible. So on another machine on the network, we just simply open up the ShadowProtect console, and we go into VirtualBoot. VirtualBoot is what performs a recovery. So when I go in here and go add image file, I'm going to locate the backup directory which we can pre-save, and then just scrolling down, here's my last incremental that we just did before that problem happened, incremental number 32 here. I'm going to select that, put in my encryption key, go OK, and I've got the ability here to roll back. I could have a D drive that I want to roll back, or maybe C drive I want to go back to an hour ago. In this case, I don't need the recovery partition, but it's very flexible per volume at what point you want to recover. Initially, let's take a look at Hyper-V. Going to go next, machine name, call it STC01, 2 core, 2 gig of RAM, automatically start the machine and go. So extremely easy. A couple of clicks later, again, this might be my backup machine, it could be Hyper-V or VirtualBox, we're starting the process. The first thing you can see it doing there, HIR processing, that is basically a hardware independent restore. It says I don't care where the backup came from. In this case, yes, it was Hyper-V. We're now putting it back into Hyper-V, so that's fairly straightforward. But that backup could have been a physical server. We'll do this again into vSphere as well. But it is very built-in and intuitive. It'll make sure that Windows doesn't crash booting up in a different environment than when it came from. We'll then connect to Hyper-V in this case, create the VM, and we'll boot it straight away. I don't want to wait to restore the data. You know, this could be a 2 terabyte plus VM. That could take too long. So what we want to do is just get this machine booting straight off the compressed image. Now, a way that does this is extremely powerful. So we can see here that is booting. Now, the Hyper-V one, let's just look at that, and then I'll come back and look at vSphere in a second, because it is very straightforward. Basically, on the disk, I've got 2 options here. The first thing is I've got, on a BDR, I've got a RAID 5 volume here. It's an E drive. Now, in here, under my backup folder, is where I've got the VirtualBoot. That is a migration file. It does 3 main things. The first thing is it tells Image Manager, please do not consolidate these backups anymore. We're currently using them for a DR. The other thing it does is it allows the VirtualBoot machine to continue backups if I want to without touching the rest of that backup chain. So it's read-only from the backup chain. The second thing that happens is under the Hyper-V default machine folder, again for VirtualBox, under the VirtualBox preferences, under your virtual hard disk folder, it's created VirtualBoot. You've got a VHDX here. Now the size of this will be the total size of all combined volumes. So if you had a 100 gig C drive and a 300 gig D drive, that would be a 400 gig VHDX. The cool thing is that it's thin provisioned and it is only containing the disk map. So this file is actually only 37 meg in size, but we've got here a snapshot file, an AVHDX, so that contains the rights of the VirtualBoot VM. Now, while that's running, while that VirtualBoot's running, as it's booting here, you can see it's a little slow coming off that compressed chain, but it is writing into the VHDX file, the AVHDX. So if I subsequently had to reboot that Hyper-V VM, whereas changes are made, it's going to read from this AVHDX. So the performance will only get better over time, and that allows me to operate quite functionally until I can pre-stage it back into a production workload. So VirtualBoot is really powerful from that perspective. So it's a good exercise here because I can take you through what I need to look at there. But basically, this Hyper-V machine is now fully booted up, and you can see that I did that backup at 11:39. We've talked through and done a few other things, but it's now 11:47. So within 5 minutes, we have done a backup and fully recovered it into a running virtual machine. So really powerful. Now, when I turn this off, so jumping back into the console, again going to run VirtualBoot, add image file. Again, I'm selecting a path that I've pre-saved with the SMB credentials. Select, I don't need the recovery partition, so we'll just focus on the C drive. It pulls across all of the volumes in that job, so just select what you need. I need to authenticate here. Log into vSphere. And then basically what we're handing over. So it's automatically found my SMB path, select VMware host. Again, the plugin happens automatically. We select the data store. This is where you can see the migrate to data drive. You can automatically start the machine after creating it, or just migrate it, and then it allows you to configure your VMware settings later. But again, if you don't migrate the data drive, you can do the backfill process later. So it's very flexible. Cool. So 2 core, 2 gig of RAM, automatically start the machine and create. I'll point out just while that's running, if you go to StorageCraft.com and go over to support, software downloads and updates, this is where you can download the ShadowProtect software from. So just on your BDR, you're going to have just the standard 64-bit installer file. Further down, you've got the socket license service if you need to for licensing, but here is where you can download the VirtualBoot Hyper-V or VSphere plugin. So the VSphere plugin actually gets installed automatically. If your VMware host is unable to resolve DNS, this is where you may like to download the plugin and install it manually. Otherwise, the Hyper-V VirtualBoot, that just gets installed on the Hyper-V host along with a copy of SPX. You don't need any licensing to run that, so very straightforward. Just scrolling down a bit further, this is where you can download the image manager software from, we'll look at in a minute, and then right down the bottom is ShadowControl. So this is the centralized monitoring and management appliance we touched on earlier. So just having a look here, I can see SPX is now starting that virtual machine. So let's jump back into VMware. I can see here this STCO2 server has just started now. But again, that machine that I backed up in Hyper-V not that long ago is now instantly booting straight into a vSphere environment. It has sorted out the drivers. Windows is now booting that straight away. So we'll come back and look at that before I end the webinar. If we jump into Image Manager quickly, let's take a look at HeadStart Restore. So I've got an Exchange server here. Historically, if you haven't used VirtualBoot, and you're using our recovery environment, you have to go and create a virtual disk for each of your volumes. You have to make sure it's the same size or larger, and then attach it to a VM and all that process. So with HeadStart Restore, I can simply go create job, HeadStart Restore. I can say for VMware, I want VMDK, and store it straight in a data store. For Hyper-V, I can go VHD, VHDX. Choose a Hyper-V machine folder. I'm just going to create a disk here. I'm just going to put in, folder. I'm just going to put in STCO1. And then you create a lag time. So generally you're going to have like 4 to 8 hours or even a day or two, but it will store everything up until this point. Once a new backup comes in, Image Manager will verify it. Once it's over this lag window, it will automatically get extracted into the virtual disk. So we add volumes. It's found my 2 C and D drive there. Put in my encryption key. And what it's going to do really cool is automatically going to create the VHDX files to the original volume size automatically for me. So it's going to create these disks and restore concurrently all of those volumes. So go save. This is basically going through the process now of creating those disks. It takes time to do a full restore of the whole backup chain. So the idea is you can do this in advance to a disaster. If it's a Hyper-V or VMware disk that gets ransomware or corruption, you shut the VM down, you detach the VHD or the virtual disk, reattach these pre-stage ones, and you boot straight back up the same VM, the same settings, and we can get up and running very quickly. So HeadStart Restore is a fantastic free feature. You do not need to activate or license Image Manager at all. It came out free about 12 months or more ago with Image Manager version 7. So a fantastic solution for recovery, migration, or pre-staging your backup images. Now, just finally, we've got 5 minutes left. I will take Q&A. May mean that we go over time a little bit. But ShadowControl, this is a fantastic centralized dashboard. I can see here my status. I've got 9 machines okay. 1 has got a critical problem. That critical problem, I can see there's I've accidentally left the job paused. Because that job is paused, Image Manager is also reporting folder inactivity, saying that backups are not coming. In fact, I've got 2 here with a problem. I know that one machine, the backups, the job hasn't been recreated, and the other one is because the backup job is paused. And then over here, the ShadowControl, this is the endpoint agent that gives me visibility across all of these ShadowProtect 5, SPX, and or Image Manager machines. So deploy out to the machines, you have the endpoint install. You've got a silent install of the installer. It doesn't require a reboot. And then you've got a command here to subscribe it to your appliance. Now, in our support.storagecraft.com site, under user guide for ShadowControl, it's got advanced parameters here. You can have a /O, it's actually a -O for organization and site, and you can roll this out with your RMM tool to your entire customer base very quickly. You might have a check that says as long as it's got ShadowProtect or Image Manager on it, then install, and you can have a variable which will automatically create the customer organization in ShadowControl based on your RMM, and therefore you can deploy very quickly. So that would automatically create the organizational levels. Under endpoints, we touched on this earlier on when I kicked off a backup job. You can see all the last backups. We can see with these little green arrows if anything's out of date, and that actually allows us to jump into the push install where we can go in and immediately, update any of the products very quickly. It'll tick ones that are out of date. We can push out the update to them. So very much multi-tenancy design. You can run this in the cloud or in your own environment very easily. And it's really driven off these status rules. This is what provides the biggest benefit and the automation to the solution. Rather than logging a job in your help desk every time there's a problem, you can say, as long as I've got a good backup within the hour, then just ignore problems, or set some sort of SLA that you want to respond to. I've got there pulls backup jobs older than 1 day, log as a critical alert. That's what we're seeing on the dashboard. It can tell you if you forgot to add it into Image Manager as a managed job. It can warn you on licensing. And we've obviously got all the Image Manager rules as well: verification, consolidation, retention, replication, queue size, HeadStart Restore queue size. So we can monitor all of these things that you're doing and set a threshold before it alerts you. And you could have different alerting for different customers. A lot of our resellers love what's called the ITSM notifications. So what that can actually do is saying, on breaching a status rule, I want you to log a ticket in my help desk with all the details, and then I'll respond. So rather than every issue or every error, it will basically use status rules to then alert you to a problem that you want to deal with. We've also got a lot of reporting in here. So we get a lot of information and reporting. These can be co-branded. They can go directly to your customers. 47 out of 47 succeeded today, and you can have daily, weekly, or monthly. You can look at failures, average backup sizes if there's issues. We've got all the Image Manager information. We've even got historical forecasting based on current usage, what your storage might be. So that's really cool, really flexible. And then the final thing is the policies. This allows you to configure backup jobs in ShadowControl and deploy them out to a large number of computers without having to log in. So I actually create these policies, and then under organizations, what I tend to do is edit a site and define or deploy the policy here. So I can say for any machine in the site, I want it to have my high 30-minute 24/7 policy, and the full backup, the initial backup might run at 9 p.m. 10 p.m. that night or something like that. Which it's 24 hours, so 10 p.m. So yeah, it's a really flexible, really scalable way to centrally monitor and manage your StorageCraft workloads. So let's just have a look at where this VM's at to here. So actually we can see it's boot up. So this is the one we did in Hyper-V at 11:39 a.m. Sydney time. Obviously that was about 20 minutes ago now, because we had to fluff around and I did the Hyper-V VirtualBoot first, but very effective. That incremental number 32 backup we did, if we look at this backup job here, has also been replicated to the StorageCraft cloud. So I've got DR offsite as well. That backup is ready there to be recovered in the cloud as well. So extremely powerful and flexible. So guys, I have kind of rushed through a bit of this, but hopefully it's given you a bit of insight into how powerful our ShadowProtect and disaster recovery solution is. Okay, well thanks again for your time, for everyone attending today, and for anyone watching this in the future.